You have to make the first step to arrive at meaning. And then the second portion is that meaning will then arrive to you. So you make the first step, and then Allah sends more knowledge your way. And once you've completed both those processes, then you are on the path of knowledge. And that knowledge is, first of all, understanding each thing in creation in its proper place. And the proper place is recognizing what is its relation with itself, with other things, and with the Creator. And this is what you could call essentially deciphering chaos into order, right? Because the foremost that you look at everything out there, and at the stars and everything seems out of place. There's no order to it. But once you start understanding and recognizing what each element, which each thing where it sits, it's got a purpose, it's got a reason why it's been placed there, then you actually understand that it's there not accidentally or spontaneously. It's there for a reason. It's been placed like that. So now you recognize its order, and that's its proper place and its relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thereby you yourself are one, and you're part and parcel of the alam. So even knowing yourself and your relationship with Allah, your relationship with other creation is part and parcel of that process. And I'll just give you an example for the self, for example. So a man can be a creation by himself, a thing. Now, in relation to others, a man is also a father, a son, a brother, a friend, a servant, right? A teacher or a student. And each of these positions or places has a certain relation with other things there, right? So understanding that place really is what Islam comes about and brings, and teaches you that each thing has a proper place with relation to Allah. When you understand all this, you will understand what the alameen are. And once you understand what the alameen is, then you will recognize the proper place of the alam in relation to the Rabb, right? And then you will understand who the Rabb really is. Then you will be able to allocate him proper praise. And until you reach that point, you will always be in a state of turmoil, always be agitated and restless, trying to figure out, what are things? Because a human being psychologically, most restless stage, most agitated state psychologically is a state of not knowing. When you know something, then you arrive at a peace of tranquility. Because knowledge gives you hilm, and hilm is intelligence as well as forbearance, which is why a dreamer is also called a halim, because he dreams, and you cannot dream when you're in a state of agitation. You have to be completely at peace.
That's true.
So this is essentially, it starts with your fitra. It goes through the hierarchies of intelligence. There are 4 hierarchies Ghazali explains in his book of knowledge. And then the final is a return to fitra. That's the raja. And it's the place where the human being will be most tranquil, which is why then Allah says, Ya ayyuhan nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki, return now back to your Lord. Right? Fadkhuli fi ibadi, wadkhuli jannati, enter among my servants and enter into my paradise. This return is what cosmologically what the human being essentially needs to do. So the whole reason behind studying the stars, the planets, the systems, insofar as the material universe is concerned, there are other 7 realms of study as well, which are now the spiritual realms, right? And each one of those has got a designation, a composition, it's got form and substance, it's got meaning. And everything in them has got meaning and substance, form. That entirety is encompassed inside the human being. Imam Ali said that you might think yourself insignificant a thing, then yet within you resides the entirety of the cosmos. So when you let your intellect go free into seeking knowledge, then the entirety of the cosmos is encompassed within you. But it has to begin with the niyyah. So if the individual's purpose and intent is just to study Mars and study the moon, just, you know, so that they can colonize the place and mine the place for minerals, then you're really not on a path of knowledge. So what we have today, comparative to what we had 1,000 years ago, there's a vast difference, right?
Yeah.
So modern scientists will say that the Muslims brought about a decline of science, but they really didn't. They recognized the limits of studying physicality, and then they recognized the expanse of studying spirituality.
Exactly.
So Ghazali's Ihya is attributed to that, because then you actually go outward without having to physically go outward, and you still understand what's going on outward.
Exactly. I mean, that's what's beautiful. What I feel that Islamic cosmology actually, you know, talks about the qualitative nature of the cosmos. And right now we have the kind of cosmology that we have. It's reductionist, and it's just, you know, it's just focusing on the quantitative aspect. And because we are talking about something which is way, way, way beyond our direct observation or our experimentation, quantification of something which is way beyond your scope will always result in something, you know, you will make mistakes. It will be an incomplete picture. So Islamic cosmology essentially is like a very rich, it's very vast. But I want to know, like, because you talked about Mishkat al-Anwar, so a little bit on that. What exactly do you have in mind, in the sense, if, as you know, like a student wants to study Islamic cosmology, and then this is one of the texts to, you know, start from maybe, or to, you know, sort of get acquaintance with, what exactly one expects?
So in any field of knowledge, there's first of all understanding what the objective elements of knowledge is, and then what the subjective elements of knowledge are. If you're going to look at the subjective element, then you're only studying the subject. So the subject would be physics or astronomy or quantum or whatever. That's a subject. It's subjective and it's only unique to itself. Objectivity will encompass the entirety of that matter. Now, to go into objectivity, it really depends on which door you use. You can enter into it from the Quranic door, but the Quran is the most complex of that knowledge. You need to be guided on towards that. In this case, if you go back in the regression that I mentioned, right, from the Sahaba, going back the Salaf, and then the scholars, and then the teacher, and now the student. So each one of those will open the door to the next. So from me as a teacher, I would open the door to the scholar that I believe would give the student a more objective understanding of it. Because getting into the semantics and the subjectivities really doesn't matter. You can measure the distance of a planet at 500 kilometers or 200 kilometers. It doesn't really matter in the holistic of things, because what difference does it make? If you think about it, what difference does the distance of the moon from the earth, what does it really mean? Once you understand that, then whether it's a variant of plus or minus 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter, right? It's quantitative, it's subjective and semantic. So what the Mishkat does is it gives you a more spiritual perspective of cosmology. And Ghazali starts by identifying the prime metaphysical element that is meant to give an individual knowledge. And he says that knowledge is light in and of itself, in that the inherent property of light is to reveal what has been kept concealed, which is what knowledge really does. But it all depends on how you look at it. And that's when he starts making the distinction between physical sight and insight. Right? So the way he elaborates the whole thing is, but by the time you finish the Mishkat, you actually have a doorway into cosmology.
Yeah.
Because then you start seeing the Quran not from the text that's written. You actually start seeing it from the essence that it's giving out.
Exactly.
because you no longer use your physical eyes in this case. The way Sheikh Imran explains it, his explanation is a bit, it's non-scholarly in the lectures he gives because of the audience he's speaking to naturally. But in the scholastic terminology, it's really more fruitful in this case, right?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, I mean, because many people have this idea that, either basically their idea of the universe can only be studied physically because it's physical and it's like material. And that's a product of, let's say, the 17th century Europe and all of the movements, the mechanical philosophy, this dichotomy between mind and matter and all of that. But the richness of the Islamic tradition lies in the fact that it has both places for sight as well as insight, for spiritual as well as physical, for quantitative as well as qualitative. So we had like physical science, but it was placed in the things that you can study physically and quantitatively. So like stuff, physics, optics, or something. Yeah. But then there are things that you cannot study physically and quantitatively, and they require this insight. So something which is way beyond the human experience, and which also, like the vision that the Quran gives us is that the universe is stuff, but it's also meaning. It means something. It's not just forms. It's also it carries that meaning. So the entire, Islamic tradition actually encapsulates that double-sided, that holistic picture of, things that can be quantitatively studied, and that constitutes the science. And then there are things that are qualitatively studied. That includes cosmology. Its entirety. And one could argue that, for example, there are disciplines that lie somewhere in between. So some aspects of the world, like for example in biology, some can be studied quantitatively. Whatever our observation, our sight can sense and take data from. But there are aspects of creation which are beyond sight and which are, metaphysical. So that's why in the Islamic biological text, you find this mixture of sight and insight, of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So that's very nice, mashallah. But I want to know a little bit more on basically, this idea of cosmology, because we are so trained into thinking that cosmology means, Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson, stars, planets, galaxies, and Big Bang, and this, that. But from the Islamic perspective, it's a complete shift. So if you could just explain Islamic cosmology and its basic motivations, and it's like, how can a modern mind adapt to that? How can we sort of get, basically, how can it make sense to us, our completely physicalized, mechanical way of thinking?
The main element here is really in the language. As a linguist, so okay, modern secularists, they like using, number one, they like saying that science is the hallmark of human civilization. That's where they start. And then they say that the culture is what defines the language used. So in the modern sense, now you look at how the Western world has transformed from the 15th century. They had a time when the language itself, the English language, was an inflectious language, meaning that it derived meaning from root words.
Yes.
But now it's no longer an infectious language. It is a completely analytical language, and it's very syntax. Because you cannot use a single word to define anything without using in English what you call helping words.
Yeah.
So if I say cosmos, it doesn't really mean anything to you insofar as just what cosmos means, until and unless I add more words to that word. only then will you be able to understand exactly in what context
What?
do I mean cosmos.
Yes, that's true.
This is not the case with the Arabic language. The Arabic language is very specific.
Yeah.
And it's very inflectious, meaning you could incorporate an entire statement into one word.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, this is where it becomes complex because we are trained to think and dream in the English language. And there's another theory in linguistics, is that the language you think and dream in is what will define your thought process.
Yeah, that's true.
Ahmad Didat, I think, made a comment to someone during one of his lectures, and he told him that if you think and dream in the English language, you are an Englishman. Doesn't matter which part of the world you come from. And this is because the English language has a derivative from its roots in Germanic and Latin. Now, it all depends on how you perceive reality and what your definition of reality is. That will determine what your culture is going to be and how you're going to see the alam, the worlds.
Right.
If you look at the English language and you ask an Englishman, what does reality mean? They will not be able to tell you. But if you look at the root of the language, you find that reality comes from the Latin word res. Now, res means thing, matter, goods, property. Now, that should give you an understanding of exactly what sort of mindset that they have, because a thing is made from matter, and goods are made from things.
Yes.
And property are essentially goods that are owned. So right there in the language, you can see a complete sense of materialism.
Absolutely.
And that's how they view the world, because to them, reality is thing and matter and object and property. Now, when you look at the Islamic definition, the Arabic definition, thing is shay'in or shay'un.
Yeah.
But reality is haqiqa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And haqiqa is then derived from the word haq, and that's one of Allah's names, attributes, al-haq. So you can see in the Islamic perspective of what you could say a worldview, is that Islamic worldview is that of reality itself, not thing, right? And it's broken down into two. There is haqiqa, which is essential truth, which is real truth. And then there is waqiyah, which is factual truth. So Arabic makes the distinction very clear as to what is true reality and what is factual reality, a factual truth. Now, when you apply that mindset to the Quran and you want to look for what is cosmology in the Quran, in every single instance, Allah always mentions samawat wal ard. He always separates the two. You really have to think about, why does he really do that? Now, obviously, at the time of the Arabs, ard and sama have got multiple meanings individually. So ard can be planet Earth, ard can be land, ard can be also matter, material. Now, sama can be spirit, can be sublime, ethereal. That's why sky, atmosphere, those kinds of elements which are light in comparison are called sama. But when he puts them together, the two words together in a phrase, which is a shibhu jumla, it's like a sentence, but it's not a sentence. So it is an all-encompassing definition. Samawat wal ard. He is distinguishing between what is haqiqa and what is waqiyah. What are the factual material elements? And then what are the spiritual elements? And so you can see that the material universe is singular in this context. But then the sab'a samawat, the rest of the realms, there are 7 of those. And that entire thing is what Islam defines as the cosmos. The cosmos is not just the ard portion, it's also the samawat portion. Right? I don't know if that definition answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Of course, it does. Because, this is actually, to be honest, this is what I wanted to know. Because, inshallah, I was actually recording it. So, what we can do, if you like the recording, I'll share it with you. What we can do is we can use it as a like a promotional video before we go for the live stream. And so, if you like it, then we can go ahead with that. Because the thing is that people are very interested in Islamic science because that is something that they can relate to. But Islamic cosmology is something that people don't really know. They know cosmology and they're interested in it. But the first time, even I was interested in all of Islam, but even when I approached cosmology, I was like, okay, this is very different. This is something, it's spirituality in essence. It's like a complete spiritual discipline. So the first time you sort of get to know this, you're a bit shocked. This is not what I was looking for, because you're used to modern cosmology, which is so quantitative. But then, of course, when you realize, okay, this is the entire Islamic vision on reality is this, and the spiritual aspect is the central aspect. Hence, the study of the cosmos, the study of reality, the study of existence would entail a very spiritual outlook. So it all makes sense.